On the 9th of December 2019, around 100 tourists set out for White Island, an active volcano 50 kilometres off the coast of New Zealand. While 47 people were walking on the island, the volcano exploded. Amongst the darkness of many lost lives, there is hope and wonder in the resilience and perseverance of mankind. Before we examine the incredible videos from that unbelievable day, let's understand the events leading up to it. White Island is New Zealand's most active cone volcano and has been built up by continuous volcanic activity over the past 150,000 years. The landscape has changed dramatically over the last century as eruptions create new craters and throw out huge amounts of rocks and ash. Between 1981 and 1983 there were a series of eruptions which destroyed a forest on the island and created the crater that is now often filled with a lake. A common question about the disaster is, why were tourists allowed to visit the volcano? For over 100 years visitors have been enthralled by the spectacular scenery and volcanic activity. One of the tourists watching on the day of the disaster was Jeff Hopkins, who also visited in 1996. There were significant eruptions in 2000 and 2013. In October 2019, the volcanic tremors and sulfur dioxide gas are at their highest levels since 2016. This chart shows the seismic activity leading to the eruption. The blue line is the Displacement Seismic Amplitude Ratio, or DSAR, which indicates the deep activity within the volcano. The black line is visible geysers and fountains at the surface. On November 18th, the alert level is increased from 1 to 2 due to the increased activity. The next level is an eruption. In late November there is a lot of activity, both at the surface and deep inside the volcano. At the beginning of December the activity at the surface becomes quieter. This was a bad sign because it indicated that a seal had formed, trapping the gas and building pressure. The blue DSAR line confirms this and shows that below the seal the volcano was getting more active as the pressure built up. Around the 7th of December the DSAR gets to its most intense level. During the night of December the 8th there was a strong seismic surge. This was probably fresh magmatic fluid increasing pressure and causing cracks to form in the seal. During the next few hours the cracks in the seal would have continued to develop, until at 2:11 the pressure was too great for the seal to hold and the eruption started. This pattern has since been confirmed in the 2012 and 2013 eruptions. This is one of the tickets from the day. It advertises the fact that White Island is one of the most active volcanoes in the world, and offers the prospect of getting up close to the amazing lake of steaming acid. At around 10:20 passengers board the Phoenix, and about an hour later the Tapuia Wakari boat follows on the 1.5 hour boat ride to White Island, 48 kilometres away. There's about 600 metres of rocky terrain between the jetty and the crater lake at the northern end of the island. The ground is uneven and there are many rocks and boulders that have been thrown out of the volcano in previous eruptions. Several streams cut deep channels into the stone. Around midday, the tourists from the Phoenix are walking towards the crater lake. When they reach the crater lake, they see how beautifully serene and still it looks, not knowing that the reason for this is that there is a rock seal building up incredible pressure deeper in the volcano. helicopter pilot Brian DePau is bringing 4 tourists to the volcano. Jeff Hopkins from the Phoenix snaps these photos of his helicopter arriving. Film from the GeoNet webcam shows the passengers from the Phoenix walking towards the crater and back again. Around 1 PM the Tapuya Wakari arrives and a dinghy takes passengers to the jetty. The area is strewn with rocks thrown from the volcano. They split into 2 groups, one led by Hayden Marshall Inman and one by Kelsey Waghorn. It is Hayden's 1111th tour of the island. The other guide with Hayden is 24-year-old Tipini Mangi. It was meant to be his day off, but he was called in to cover for somebody else. In their group is the Hollander family, Barbara, Matthew, Berend and Martin, and young couple Carla Matthews and Richard Elsa and their friend Jason Griffiths. Paul Browett is on the tour with his daughters Crystal and Stephanie. Gavin and Lisa Dallow are with Lisa's daughter Zoe. And there's the Langford family, Jesse, Winona, Christine and Anthony. The last in their group is mother and daughter Julie and Jessica Richards. The other group is led by Kelsey Waghorn, a 25-year-old marine biologist. And the other guide with her is Jake Milbank, who's celebrating his 19th birthday that day. In their group is John and Chris Kozad, father and son, and Mayuri and Pratap Singh, or Mary and Paul as they were known. Matt and Lauren Ure are on their honeymoon. Also in their group is Annie Lou and her mother Alice Sang, and Rick and Ivy Reed, and Nick and Marion London. Near to the shore, honeymooners Matt and Lauren Ure stand for this photograph. About 25 minutes to 2, Kelsey's group walk towards the brilliantly yellow sulphur deposits. Annie and her mother stand next to the yellow sulphur. At about 1:45, Kelsey's group walk towards the crater lake. They arrive at the crater lake and take photographs and video of the peaceful surface. Here are Rick and Ivy Reed standing in front of the crater lake. The webcam filmed the tourists as they walk around and marvel at the volcano. This video is of Hayden's group walking towards the sulphur deposits and the crater lake beyond. During the walk to the crater lake, Crystal Browett discusses the meaning of the volcano alert level with a guide.
The higher the level, the more risk there is of an eruption. Level 3 is an eruption.
Oh, really?
So we're on a level 2 nearing level 3 now.
At about 1:55, Brian's group are walking on the western path towards the jetty. Kelsey's group are walking from the crater lake on the eastern path towards the helicopter landing pads and the jetty beyond. Hayden's group are walking towards the crater lake. At 2 o'clock, the webcam takes this photograph of Brian's group at the sulphur deposits and Hayden's group at the crater lake. These photographs were taken from the Phoenix as it went around the island. In the distance, we can see Hayden's group looking at the crater lake. Kelsey's group have walked about 300 metres from the crater lake and are about halfway back to the jetty. They stop again to take photos and videos of the amazing scenery. At 11 minutes past 2, the tourists in Kelsey's group notice the start of the eruption.
Move. Everybody go! Move! Behind rocks. Ready? Yeah. Right, move.
Passengers on the Phoenix watch in amazement as the volcano erupts. Let's look at the videos of Kelsey's group in detail to see what they show us. Kelsey immediately instructs her group to follow her away from the eruption. An American man, probably Matt, encourages everyone to move.
Move, move, move.
Everybody go!
Move.
Hayden's group are about 150 metres away, somewhere around here. We can see the eruption cloud growing. Remember that this video is taken from about 300 metres away from the crater lake. We can see Kelsey and Jake leading the group away from the eruption. This video from the earlier tour shows the path between the mounds that Kelsey's group run through just before the ash cloud covers them.
Behind rocks. Ready? Ready? Yeah. Right, move. Just after the mounds is an open plain about 200 metres long. If they'd continued further onto the plain, they would have been completely exposed to the ash cloud and the rocks being hurled from it. Kelsey and Jake led the group back towards the large mound so that they would have some amount of shelter. The black ash cloud is now almost on top of them. The video shows that even before the ash cloud reached them, they were being assaulted with rocks. These are the last shots of the tourists before the ash cloud covers them and changes their lives forever. As the ash cloud closes, the amount of rocks intensifies. Now let's see Hayden's group around the time of the eruption. Crystal, Paul and Stephanie Browett stand for a photo next to the crater lake. At 2 2, the webcam takes this photo of Hayden's group making their way away from the lake. This photograph shows their location at the time of the eruption. At 2:11, Crystal takes this photo of the start of the eruption. In this photograph, taken a few seconds later, we can see half the group just 150 meters or so from the crater lake as the eruption starts. The webcam footage shows them trying to run to safety as the volcano explodes behind them. We can see them desperately running away from it. They are only able to get about 100 meters further before it engulfs them. Let's watch the webcam video again in slow motion, this time with a video alongside taken by Crystal as she runs away. In this frame from Crystal's video, we can see other people in Hayden's group running away from the eruption. Here we can see Paul Browett looking around at his daughter and the ash cloud which is closing in fast upon them. As Stephanie ran, she clutched her phone, trying unsuccessfully to put the gas mask back on her face when she was hit by a surge of ash and rock. As Stephanie lay in the ash, the hot sun made her burns more painful. She hears her dad call out her name and she calls back to him. Everything goes quiet. People's screams cease. But every few minutes Stephanie's dad calls to her to make sure that she is still awake. Jesse is thrown over a mound by the force of the blast and is hit in the face by a flying rock. He curls into the fetal position, covering his face with his hands. From the relative safety of the boat's indoor area, the passengers on the Phoenix watch the eruption in awe. The Phoenix approaches the bay with a jetty. Everything is covered in a thick layer of ash. They can see the Tapuia Wakari without its passengers and now realise that there were tourists on the island when it erupted. The eruption is visible from Wakitani, 48 kilometres away. Off-duty helicopter pilot Mark Law sees the explosion from the mainland and calls his office. They tell him the island webcams are offline and the White Island tour boats are not responding. Law rushes to his helicopter. He arranges for Tom Story and Jason Hill to get to another helicopter. Airplane pilot John Funnell sees the explosion and flies to the island. Funnell agrees with Law to relay messages to the Coast Guard. Law phones Tim Barrow at Volcanic Air, who confirms one of his helicopters was on the island when it erupted. The blast was so powerful that Brian DePauw's helicopter was pushed off the landing pad and its rotors were broken. Brian and two of his passengers had avoided the hot acidic cloud by running into the sea and diving in. Passengers on the Phoenix see survivors gathering on the jetty. These are the tourists from Kelsey's group who have walked about 200 metres through thick ash from their spot behind the mound. Some people have gone into the sea to cool down their burns and wash the acidic ash off. Annie Lou is holding onto the ladder and is cooling her legs in the water. Nobody from Hayden's group has made it to the jetty. Ten minutes after the eruption, the dinghy from the Phoenix goes to retrieve the first survivors. Jake is overwhelmed and collapses, almost falling backwards out of the dinghy. About 400 metres inland, the tourists from Hayden's group were more exposed to the blast, which was more intense as they were closer. Jesse sat with his family for about 15 minutes wondering what to do. Paul Kingi transfers to the Tapuia Wakari and then walks into the crater in search of survivors. At 2:45, the Phoenix sets off with all 21 members of Kelsey's group and all 5 of Brian DePauw's group from the helicopter. Brian DePauw leaves his broken helicopter behind. All 21 of Hayden's group are left on the island. Paul Kingi is walking inland through deep ash and is astonished to see Jesse Langford from Hayden's group stumbling towards him. Every part of his body is burned. Kingi takes him to the Tapuia Wakari, which immediately sets off. Jesse later remembers some of the boat journey, but he loses consciousness. Kingi remains on the island to search for more survivors. At 2:50, Jason Hill takes off with Tom Story as co-pilot. A few minutes later, Mark Law follows in another helicopter. At 3:05, Tim Barrow and co-pilot Graham Hopcroft take off from their base in Rotorua. On the Phoenix, survivors are deteriorating as their burns swell and blister. Some go into shock, some scream, some can't tolerate wind or sun, others shiver uncontrollably. explosion was visible from space. The volcano rumbles occasionally, and Stephanie worries it may erupt again. She would wait for about an hour before help arrived. Story and Hill approach the Phoenix and see people performing CPR. They try to airlift the people in worse condition to get them to hospital sooner. At around 12 minutes past 3, an hour after the eruption, Law, Story and Hill land on the island. Story finds Crystal and perhaps Jessica. Both are unresponsive but have pulses. Tiffany Mangi has passed away. Nearby he finds that only one of the Hollander boys is breathing. His parents and brother are dead. Story sees footsteps leading away from the main group and finds Hayden and Winona about 40 meters away. He sees that Hayden has passed away. Winona has also passed away. The pilots find phones and tablets behind a boulder. Footprints in the ash show heroic activity after the explosion. A guide's medical kit is sitting among the group, probably carried there by Hayden or Tiffany after the blast. Many of the injured are wearing gas masks that look like they were placed on them after they'd lost consciousness. Tiffany's outstretched hand is holding an asthma inhaler, as though he was passing it to someone when he collapsed. Hayden had backtracked and tried to lead his group towards the jetty. Around 3:25, John Funnell passes on a message to the pilots that the official rescue helicopters have been called back. "11 search and rescue helicopters stayed at Wakitani Airfield, only 52 kilometers away from the injured on the island. Hill ran back to fetch his helicopter and fly it up to the crater. Law and Story began picking up casualties. Lisa Dallow asks Story for water and then starts throwing up blood and ash. Paul Broward was sitting up, but as Story approached, he told him to get Stephanie first. Story ran to Stephanie and carried her to the helicopter. He then got her father and 2 other men, including one with a head wound. Jason Hill left with 5 wounded tourists at 3:48. Ash continues to fall and the acidic air makes breathing difficult, even with masks on. Story returns to Crystal and finds that she no longer has a pulse. Story returned to perhaps Jessica, but her pulse had also gone. Story went uphill and found couple Richard Elsa and Carla Matthews, who had died together. Next to them was perhaps Julie Richards, who was also dead. Story found probably Zoe Hoskins, who was still breathing. He carried her to the helicopter and she clung on to him tightly. But on the way, she died in his arms. At 3:40, Tim Barrow's helicopter arrives. Law directs Barrow to the Hollander boy, who is now unable to communicate other than asking for water. Barrow and Hopcroft help the boy walk to the helicopter. The authorities instructed the pilots to fly the injured not to the hospital, but to the airfield. Knowing the severity of the injuries, Mark Law decided that they must take them to the hospital if possible. Tom Story stayed alone on the island for 30 minutes helping survivors. He found phones of the deceased and put them in their hands so that they could be identified. The pilots rescued 12 people in 40 minutes. After an agonising journey, the Phoenix approaches the mainland at great speed. A helicopter lands at the dock to pass victims to the ambulance staff. Another helicopter brings ash-covered people to the airfield. The skin by the knee appears thick and leathery. Around 20 to 5, the first official rescue helicopter finally arrives. The ash makes the sea yellow. The acid has killed many fish in the water. It is about 150 minutes since the eruption. All survivors have already been rescued by the volunteers. Only 8 deceased victims are still on the island. Later that night, heavy rain swells the stream and washes Hayden and Winona's bodies into the sea. Jason Griffiths dies of his injuries in hospital. He had over 80% burns. On December 11th, Navy divers find Hayden's body on the sea floor and retrieve it. But as they try to load it into a boat, a wave knocks the body back into the sea and it descends into deeper water. On December the 13th, an army team recover the remaining 6 bodies. On the 14th of December, Chris Kozad dies in hospital. Some patients are repatriated. On December 22nd, Mayuri Singh, known as Mary, dies in hospital. And on Christmas Eve, the search for the bodies of Hayden and Winona was called off. By December the 30th, Despite having 90% burns, Jesse managed to write a eulogy for his parents and sister. On the 13th of January, Paul Browett dies in hospital. On January 28th, Pratap Singh, known as Paul, dies in hospital. 7 months after the disaster, on July 2nd, Horst Westenfelder dies in hospital. He is the last to die of their injuries. 22 people had lost their lives. Due to the severity of their injuries, 10 of the 12 people rescued by the helicopter pilots didn't survive. 25 of the 47 on the island survived. Some of them have shared their incredible stories of recovery. Nick and Marion London both had about 50% burns. John Kozad's son, Chris, died in hospital. John had 40% burns. The doctors told his wife he probably wouldn't make it because of his age. On Christmas Day, he opened an eye for the first time since the eruption. It has been a long recovery, but he is able to watch the club he and Chris used to enjoy together. Kelsey Waghorn had many injuries. In 2023, Kelsey went on an expedition to South Georgia Island. Matt and Lauren Uri were on their honeymoon. Matt had 53% burns. Lauren also had severe burns. She returned to studying and graduated in laboratory science in 2022. Jesse Langford had 90% burns. Three years after the eruption, Jesse returned to White Island to see a memorial to Hayden and his sister Winona. Stephanie Browett's sister and father died in the eruption. She had 70% burns. In 2023, the remarkable pilots who rescued the people from the island were awarded medals for their bravery. Tom Story, Jason Hill, Tim Barrow, Graham Hopcroft, Callum Mill and Sam Jones received the New Zealand Bravery Decoration. Mark Law received the New Zealand Bravery Star.